We're just getting situated here, so give us a minute. Hi.
Sounds good. Good to be here. Thank you.
Okay, and we are recording just so everyone is aware of that. We know 5 o'clock's a tricky time for people to be able to join in these meetings, but we did not want to overlap with Charlotte Street's session that they're going to have at 6:30 for the residency program. But there's a lot of really great information that Heather's able to share. So I think we're probably going to give everyone just another minute or two to join in so that we don't miss anyone from the beginning. So if you need to go get your cup of tea or anything, go do that. We doing okay, Wolf?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. You're such a pro on this. That's why I had to have you on the call.
Let's see if I can live up to that. All right, are y'all ready, or do you want to?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go.
Ready.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us.
Kind of. It's taking its sweet time. Give it. Like
Okay. I see something that says meetings now streaming live on Facebook, so I'm going to go with that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is on Urban Art House's webpage or our Facebook page, and then I think that Marissa's also sharing it to Kansas City Artists Coalition Facebook page so that we are able to get this information out to the most people. I'm Angie Hyduke. I'm CEO of Urban Art House. I have Marissa Stark on the call as well with the Kansas City Artists Coalition. Our organizations have been partnering up on several activities and things that our artist members can benefit from. And we do so much great work with ArtsKC that we thought this is a great platform in order for us to share information about the upcoming grants for artists that are available. And then the fabulous Wolf Brack is here as well, which is Wolf is our curator and operations manager at the Art House, and he's there hanging our next show. There's some gorgeous stuff behind him. Oh, there it all is, yay. So anyway, Heather Beffa with ArtsKC is going to present to us, and we can ask her questions along the way. If you want to pose a question in the chat, you're welcome to, but you're also welcome to use the, I believe the raise hand is in reactions, which is across the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you do have a question, feel free to raise a hand, and if nobody's paying attention to you, feel free just to speak up, okay? All right, Heather, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so glad to see all of you here. We have a really perfect group on the call today. And I'm happy to inform you about ArtsKC's inspiration grants and further try to give you some good advice that you can use as you apply for project grants for artists in your careers. So if you haven't applied for a grant before, or if you've just heard about them before, I like to be kind of introductory, although I'm sure there's people on the call and listening today who have applied for grants before and know them really well. Of course, grants are financial support, and they're a kind of free money that you can usually use for a specific purpose that you have to apply for, usually with a funder. This is different from, of course, revenue you might raise in your arts practice by selling your work or by doing performances or selling books or publications or anything else that you might do. And that's part of the big difference, because say if you sell an album or a CD or a picture, that's very transactional, and you pass on the artwork, and then you get that financial support or compensation for that product, and then you're done. A grant is the beginning of a relationship with a funder. as well as being financial support for something that you're applying for. And that's something that I really want to emphasize when I get to talk to people who are applying, because unlike maybe like a windfall or other type of financial support, recognizing it as a relationship that you're starting when you reach out to an organization for funding, I think can really set you up for a good deal of success and a longer standing relationship with that funder. Most grant dollars are available through philanthropy, and philanthropy exists to help support a greater good in a number of different ways. And so when you approach a funder for grant money, it's good to keep that greater good in mind in the way that you propose it. And as artists who tend to be more focused on their own particular practice, maybe in your studio or with your band or in your theater group, sometimes that emphasis on the greater community may seem a bit further away from you, or it may seem so embedded in your practice that you feel it's inherent, and you may kind of forget to really emphasize that in your writing or in your presentation with that funder. So that's really important to do and to keep in mind. Part of why I say grants are only kind of free money is because they almost always involve some kind of strings with a funder, and those exist for a good reason. Usually there's you have to do the project you propose pretty closely. There's almost always some changes, but you have to use the funds the way that you said you would. So that's one string. Another is that you need to document it, and also to keep in mind as you apply and reach out for support, it's good to keep in mind that that funder will want to represent you. So you need to be ready to be represented by a funder. Have an up-to-date website, maybe a headshot, have some recent work maybe that is closely related to what you're doing, or just some good sketches or other documentation of what you're planning to do, so that that funder can tell their supporters right away what they're doing with their money. The inspiration grant is on our website, and I'll share my screen to walk you through that a little bit. I didn't make slides this time because I wanted to, of course, to have a little bit more of a conversation with you, and also to interactively show you how to apply. Almost all grants now involve applying online. There are a couple of funders out in the world that accept paper applications, but they're really pretty few and far between. Here's the ArtsKC website, artskc.org. We exist to help support the arts in the Kansas City region, which includes 2 counties in Kansas and 3 counties in Missouri. We have a variety of programs and services that we really welcome you to come and learn about. Go to artskc.org. To learn about our grants program, go to grants and then apply for a grant. Although you can also look at recent grant recipients and also look at the grant committee listing. Let's go to apply for a grant. Today we're talking about the inspiration grant, of course. You'll see that we also fund organizations. Scroll down to where it says grants for individual artists. You can read the purpose of these grants there. These are project grants for individual artists or small groups of artists. Ambitious projects of risk, growth, and change for the artist while making a positive impact on the community are the highest priority for these grants. To click through, this is the inspiration grant information page. I really highly recommend that you look over this very closely as you prepare to apply, and also just as you consider whether or not this opportunity is right for you. As you can see here, visual, dance, music, theater, poetry, and interdisciplinary art applications are welcome. We know that there are a great deal of different interpretations of what art is, and we're very welcoming of that. However, these main 6 areas, however you define them, are the main priority. Again, ambitious projects and risk, growth, and change. So that tends to mean something that is new for you, something that is a big step forward in your practice, or that is something that you haven't tried before. You don't have to be the first person on earth to be trying that thing, though. Although, of course, we really welcome a great deal of invention. I know that these definitions are really broad, but we really receive a wide variety of applications in this category, and we want to be open to all of the different expressions and cultures and traditions and avant-garde and to new ways that people want to express themselves and to impact the community. While I'm here, can everybody read this screen? Is it better if I make the text a little bit bigger? Yeah,
It's okay for me. It's fine.
It's okay. All right. Very good. So this grant is being offered in a round. Increase that size just a little bit. We're offering this around. Sometimes you'll see that as you look around at project grants. Sometimes cycles. You might have heard of the Rocket Relief grant from Charlotte Street Foundation with a number of other partners in the last year, and that was offered in cycles. Our cycles and rounds are not really that different. It just means this opportunity at this time. For this round, the application deadline is in just over a week on March 26th at 11:45 p.m. And that is a system deadline. Occasionally I get an email from somebody late that night at 11:46 or even at midnight saying, oh no, I missed it. But never fear, just if you miss it by a few minutes or so, then I can fix it so you can still apply. Just try to hit that deadline as well as you possibly can. The funding decisions will be made and announced in late April 2021. So pretty quick. And then final reports, we're actually reterming those impact reports, are due by January 29th, 2022. Another thing you see here is activity dates. This is pretty closely aligned with just before when the grants are made to the deadline of that impact report, final report. For the most part, project grants tend to occur within a time frame like that, and we just refer to ours as activity dates. There's several tabs here. I won't go through every single one. However, eligibility is a big thing, and that's something to look at closely with any opportunity. You must be a practicing artist with an established record of professional achievement in the arts. You must be an adult over the age of 18. You must live in the 5-county Kansas City metropolitan area, which is Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties in Missouri, and Johnson and Wyandotte counties in Kansas. These are the focus areas, service areas of ArtsKC officially. If you live in an adjacent county to one of these, and your project will be taking place within our service area, then we can consider your application. If you received an inspiration grant recently, you need to wait out a round before you can apply again. You also must turn in your final report from your previous project. And our inspiration grants are not for regular college tuition. These grants exist to help support projects that take place outside of major university walls, et cetera. There's other forms of support for that type of education, which we certainly support in spirit. But if you're aiming for a workshop or a continuing education or a certification, you can certainly come to us with that. We also see lots of applications for residencies, but I'm sure you're hearing that those tend to refer to forms of educational activities that people who are generally beyond college age may be involved in. Of course, we'll see all sorts of exceptions to that. And finally, if you're a nonprofit organization, I'm sorry, you cannot apply for an inspiration grant. Our other grants are for nonprofit organizations only, and the inspiration grant is only for individual artists or small groups of artists that are not nonprofits, because there is a good deal of support for nonprofits in our area, and there is less support for individual artists. Are there any questions so far? Anybody? Okay, we'll just jump in if you have a question.
I technically do have a question, but I don't want to ask it if you're going to address it later. So I'll wait and see if it comes up.
Okay, thank you. Our grants are from $1,000 to $2,500. In our most recent round of grants, we made 10 grants that totaled $20,136. The average grant was $2,013. 41% of applicants received a grant of any amount. The reason I include this sentence, these couple of sentences that spell out how the most recent round go, is one thing, it's a form of transparency that I believe that our funders and that our beneficiaries really deserve. And also to try to help you set your expectations of what your chances are when you apply with us. That percentage may of course change depending on how many applications we get. If we got 100 applications, that doesn't mean that we necessarily have more funding available. So that number may change a lot in that case. We do want to keep our average grants over $2,000 if we can. And so that average grant amount may not change a lot. We have about that amount in this round for this opportunity. So keep all of that in mind. In this tab, you can access a preview of the application form. I have links to the online grant system in a few different places, so you can get to that a few times. Something they said in art school, if you're going to make something small, make it red so nobody trips over it. So that's perhaps how you can find that. If you don't already know, the way that we decide who gets funding is with a volunteer committee that's led by one of our board members. The Inspiration Grant Committee right now is led by our ArtsKC board member, Daryl Davis, who is part of Kansas City Public Schools and is serving for the 3rd year in a row as our Inspiration Grant Committee chair. The committee reviews all of the applications and makes funding recommendations, which Daryl and I bring to the board for final approval. Our evaluation is based on artistic achievement and quality, career and community impact, feasibility and budget, and any other relevant factors that come up during discussion of all of the applications. There's some conditions of the grant that I wrote out here. They're pretty typical, and they're in line with what I was referring to earlier as strings. So you have to sign a form. You need to turn in a W-9. You may be taxed on your grant, which is something that you should talk to a tax professional about. We'd like to recognize you publicly as one of our grant recipients. So that's one of our strings. And then if there's any major changes to your project, let us know about it. 9 times out of 10, these are not a problem. Sometimes when a project is altogether canceled or postponed, which is something that we saw a lot of since the beginning of COVID-19, we have some flexibility and we'll find a way to work with you. Finally, you don't have to accept grants. And this doesn't happen very often, but sometimes people get really far into something in a proposal and they even get awarded it and everything. And then something happens where they just can't proceed with the project. And it's very unfortunate, but at times we have had grant funds returned and we understand all of the different reasons why that might happen. And we simply document everything about it and kind of communicate with you as quickly as possible. There's a lot of different ways things can go. A few more tabs here. The committee listing is here. You can read Daryl Davis's bio and some of our other recent grant committee members. I was still assembling part of this committee in the last few weeks, so there's a few more members who are not listed here. You'll see that these committee members are people with a wide diversity of artistic expertise, professional backgrounds, and experience serving the committee as part of this, as part of serving the community as part of this committee and on boards around the community. I've got a tab here called General Grant Application Advice, which to some extent is a written form of this presentation. I know that we all have different ways of communicating, and sometimes just looking through a list of advice can really help. I tried to make this as universal as possible and not necessarily so specific about our grant, because we hear from a lot of our applicants that this is the first grant they've ever applied for anywhere, and we want to help support your effort in doing that. I'm going to open this preview of the application form. It'll look a little different when you're in the online grant system because, of course, it will have fields for you to type in, and it'll have upload areas as well. Some of the information here is exactly how it is on the website. And of course, we link you back to that information page. You need to give your project a name. I think that's usually best when it's something descriptive and kind of punchy, so that later when the committee is talking about it, they've got like a frame of reference that's really quick. And they're saying, oh, well, here's an album. Another person also applied for a wagon, for an album. Which one was that? Oh, of course, that one was the one that had cats in it. Oh yeah, the cat album, great. The name of it can really help. And if you have a cat album, I can't wait to hear it and learn about it. Write a project description. This form is designed to try to help you write out something that should have a good chance of being funded, including a lot of detail. One way that you can write the project description is to spell it out. You don't necessarily have to make it a list of who, what, where, when, and why, and how, but you can if you want to. If you write it in a narrative that sounds like a quick story or like a very long elevator speech, that later is fleshed out with more of the details in the other areas of this application, that can work really, really well. And then if you just imagine that there's a committee member that only reads your project description and looks at a few work samples just because they were running out of time or yours was the last one that they reviewed, then try to make sure to still make a great impression on that committee member. You can put in your amount requested. And of course, the question may arise, why would you apply for less than the maximum? And the reason is you need to show that you actually need the amount that you're requesting in your project budget. So if you don't actually need that much because you've got the rest of your project funded from somewhere else, then yeah, you would probably request less. It is up to you. Your project cost overall, this tends to exceed the amount you're requesting. We've seen budgets up to $100,000. We've seen budgets that are less than $5,000. It just depends on the scale of what you're doing. There's some fields in here that we use to collect information about who's applying and also kind of to ground our understanding of what you're doing. In choosing art type, this is about your project. It's not necessarily about you. Maybe you're a visual artist that is doing a dance performance. So you would choose dance, and then we would understand that your primary practice is in visual from your artist statement or from your website. But this helps us collect data on that. The use of grant funds, this is really short because you've already put in that project description that's longer. And so maybe your use of grant funds would be just for recording studio time or for supplies. But if you're really just going to be distributing the funds across the whole project, you could write whole project. Sometimes reviewers really zoom in on this particular area and kind of debate, what's the use of grant funds here, and maybe it would be better if they put the grant funds towards travel expenses, etc. It's up to you. Sometimes that also depends on what phase of the project you're in too. There's some more questions here, like the location, the specific activity dates, local community impact, and other artist involvement. We combined these fields this year, not only to try to make the form a little shorter, but also because in the evaluation form, these things are weighed together. So what is the impact that your project will have on the local creative community or on the creative community? This can take a lot of different forms. If there's other artists involved in the project, most likely they will benefit, but make a case for it, persuade us. Make sure that we understand tangibly how supporting your project will benefit others. It may be something very tangible, like my project will help feed people food, or maybe it will feed their soul and their inspiration. When it comes to something a bit less tangible, like feeding their soul or their inspiration, that's where you've got to flex some more persuasive muscles and try to make that immediate and important to that committee member that's reading it. But those are just a couple of examples. Sometimes I've seen some arguments that are not quite as strong. And so whatever your argument is in this area, maybe run it by somebody that you know that knows your project well, but also can be objective about it and ask them if it would persuade them to fund the project. little bit further down, advancement of professional development. This is about the impact of the project on you. Will it be helping to train you or to help you gain more experience? All these questions in here, you don't have to answer every single one. This is meant to kind of flesh out, this is what we're looking for in this area. So it's not necessarily you have to answer every single one. But again, persuade us, how will funding your project now help support you as an artist? And sometimes what we read here kind of shows us, well, at this stage of the project, the impact is really, really long-term, and it's kind of hard to see it in the immediate. So again, try to make an argument for both the short-term and the long-term if you can. I think that can be very, very persuasive. Budget flexibility. If you can adjust your expense budget or make up for some of the revenue if you're granted less than the requested amount. This is kind of a wiggle room area. Project budget, you are required to submit a project budget, and I'll walk you through how to make one of those really briefly before the end of our time today. Resume and artist statement or bio. Your resume may or may not be involved to your artistic practice. If your resume is not necessarily all made up of art experience, that's okay. We just want to learn more about you and understand where you are in your career. If you do have an artist resume, then please go ahead and submit that. The artist statement or bio is optional because, of course, not all artists have these materials. Artist statements are, of course, most common amongst visual artists, and bios are more common amongst performing artists. So you may have seen, of course, artist statements at visual art shows accompanying the other materials of the show. And bios you may have seen in playbills or on websites of dancers, actors, and musicians. If you want to take this opportunity to write either of those and include it here, then please do. This is, I would say, one of the most expressive parts of a grant application, which can be relatively dry reading. And this is a really good place to put in some of those more poetic, dreamlike, or especially exuberant pieces of writing that you may have in you that you just want everybody to read and understand about you. The work samples, we ask for them so that we can try to imagine your project when it's further along. So this can be samples of your recent or current work, but it's really best if these are really closely related to what you're proposing to do. Works in progress, sketches, and outlines, and diagrams, those are all very welcome. But my background is mostly in visual art, but I hope you understand also if you're in music and you've just kind of hummed your new song to yourself and recorded it, and you hope that that will help us understand what your new music will sound like, then consider including that. To me, I think that a work in progress in whatever form it's in can be more helpful than an unrelated work from 10 years ago, even if that does really exhibit a lot of great things about yourself and the things that you want to make. So choose what you're including as well as you can. I included a bunch of data here about different things to include. If you need to resize an image, there's a free resource right here. There's a link to that. If you're a writer, or if you're including media, if you can try to keep it short, that would be helpful because the committee members will be reviewing probably 40 of these. And with multiple work samples from each submission, there's really a lot. And it's unlikely that they're going to read a novel if you're working on a novel, or watch a movie, an entire movie, if that's something that you're working on. So I would say for time-related work, 2 to 5 minutes that really exemplifies what you're aiming for can be ideal. And writing, I've got it here, no more than 10 to 15 pages of material. Our reviewers will probably review that, but maybe half of that. As far as music and video goes, include web links to your music or video that are on a public platform like YouTube, Vimeo, or sometimes people will include a Dropbox link. And if you want to keep it private, you can put passwords on any of those platforms, or with a Dropbox that you're keeping private, you can include the password to that. Sometimes people will set up a folder just for an application, and that keeps it pretty simple. The reason that we don't accept MP3s and MP4s in the system is because the system doesn't handle them very well. And also in some forms of digital art, by providing an MP3 or an MP4, you're sort of giving your work away. And we don't want to facilitate that. So that's this area. The last two areas are related to what I was saying earlier, where it's good to be ready to be represented. Write a short summary. You could just redraft your project description as quickly as you can. And if you can use this format, that would be ideal, with your name, the type of artist, what you plan to do, why, with whom, where, and how. Grant funds will be used for this part of it. And then choose an image. Later, we'll use these to put them on our website under, if you get the grant, then we've got that ready to go and we can announce it very, very quickly. Part of the application stays internal and is not part of the consideration for your application. Functionally, that last image for a representation of your project is the end of the application. The rest of what's here in the optional section is truly optional. You can skip the entire thing, you can fill out part of it, or you can fill out all of it. We're collecting this information because ArtsKC follows its official diversity statement to bring together people of diverse cultures, backgrounds, ethnicities, and socioeconomic circumstances with the power of the arts. If you want to read that statement, you can click here. We want to learn about who's reaching out to us and who's engaging with our programs. So there's some questions here related to age, gender, transgender, pronouns, ethnicity, veteran status, disability, and sexual orientation. And like I said, you can fill out or leave blank any of those that you wish to. They'll stay internal. I will compile them into a summary and provide them to the committee in summary form, so not linked to any particular application, so that they have an idea of who reached out. As you work on your application, it's good to hit save, which is at the bottom of the page. And also when you're finished, make sure to hit the submit button. Any questions about our application form?
I have a few that I'd love to ask, just to double check I'm doing the right stuff.
Sure.
Number one, how long do you recommend the project description should be, just considering the character limit? I mean, I know you recommended sort of a long elevator pitch, but considering the committee itself, do you have a recommendation as to like a certain number of paragraphs or anything like that?
No, the character limit is meant to try to keep it relatively brief, although healthy. You don't have to use every single character in our fields, in any of our fields. I would say write enough so that people understand the entire project.
Great.
And the budget really should be another form of that project description, but in number form. So
Great.
it shouldn't have like a big surprise in it, like you're going to fly across an ocean, you know, that you didn't mention flying across that ocean in your project. Right. Yeah. Surprise.
Great. Thank you. And if you personally have all of sort of the equipment that you've invested with your own money for this project that you're wanting to make, how do you want someone to present these numbers to you as a grant funder if everything relates to performance fees and your own labor costs? How do you envision that being presented and sort of supporting the mission and the vision of ArtsKC?
Absolutely. Are these materials and supplies that are kind of long-term investments that you've had for a long time, or just kind of recent and really specific to that project?
So they're long-term investments. On top of being a musician, I am also a content creator. So I have, you know, a really nice camera that I now have, really nice lights, microphones, a drone. I'm a certified FAA pilot for droning and stuff. So like, I don't quite know, because of what this project is. I want to make sure that that's itemized, but I didn't quite know if, you know, there's this wiggle room of like, what's my own fees and expenses, and then what are the performers' expenses that I want to collaborate with. I just wanted to try to get some clarity from you about how that should be listed or how that should be framed.
Something that I think that's a good question. Something that people consider when they're reviewing project budgets is this complete? Does this really account for what it takes to do this? And so when you've already got equipment and materials for something, and if it is a long-term, something you invested in a long time ago, like that drone, like that probably cost a couple $100, if not more, you don't necessarily have to keep that item in the budget necessarily. But you could list them in the budget document, like already acquired, you know, or already in my possession, and also will be used for this project. You could just list them without dollar amounts at the bottom, and just say, you know, costs already absorbed or already paid off, or etc. If part of the aim of your project is to try to pay off some of that, then it would make more sense to include it in the expenses of the project. More detailed but kind of rare is accounting for wear and tear on equipment, but I have not seen that in a project budget yet. So that's a little bit more common in like nonprofit annual accounting, that they'll account for wear and tear.
Great. I'll make sure that my last two questions are short and sweet. I have an artistic statement / bio that's a shortened version that's less than 100 words. And then I have one that's more than 100 words. Just from doing different gigs over the years, some people like one or the other. Do you have a preference for the shortened one or the long?
That's a good, actually, I think somebody else asked me that question recently, and it seems that there are various opportunities that have preferences on that lately. Is that something you've encountered?
Yes, I've just noticed for doing like being like a headliner for certain gigs, people love a shortened version just because it's punchy and sweet for social media. And then I've had the honor of being like a guest clinician for this choral group in Virginia. So they wanted a long version because they were like, yeah, we want these teachers and these people to get to know you as much as possible. So yeah.
I think as long as it's no longer than a page, people will probably read it on my committee, and probably gain an appreciation for who you are and understand how all the pieces of your application fit together from what you submit. And that's really the point of it. It's a very human part of an application, and it's we asked for it because we wanted to supply an area for that.
Amazing, thank you. And then my last question is, what's the recommended dimension size of the photo that you may be putting on the ArtsKC website? Do you have any certain size constraints?
I don't, but you can see how that turns out on our grant recipients page. And I'll go down to grant recipients inspiration. Those last two parts of the application before the diversity questions were for an image that you choose yourself and a piece of writing that you supply yourself. And this is how it will show up on the website. It will include, I'll make this a little larger. It'll include your name and your project name, and then a block of text that's written in that format that I supplied in the description, and a link to your professional site, your preferred professional site. Occasionally people apply with artist names. So if you have a preferred artist name, please let us know that, and we can make sure that that's on the page properly. Because we want to represent you accurately, and we want it to some extent be in your hands. So you can see that there are artists here who prefer to include a headshot, and others that prefer to include a sample of their proposed project. And it's really up to you. Art that I think that performance images and also images that show art engagement can be especially persuasive. But again, it's really up to you on how you want to be represented. Here's an image of an exhibition that received a grant, and this is an image of a band that got a grant. I just handle the dimensions as well as I can, honestly. I find that sometimes putting in those image dimension requirements can make things harder on people, and I'd prefer to try to make things easier if I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's it from me. I really appreciate it.
You're absolutely welcome. Here's a link to the online grant system. We use a platform called Foundant, which you may have encountered in some other opportunities. There's some instructions over on the right for first-time applicants, so make sure to review that really quickly. Something that's a little confusing is you're going to create an account, and then that account will be referred to as organization, which as an individual applicant is a little confusing, but just you're the organization and then you're the user attached to that organization. So that's pretty much all you need to know. You just click create account to get started. Yeah, put in some stuff for me, isn't that so helpful? So here for organization name, I would put Heather Beffa, or if I had an artist name, then I would put in my artist name probably, or my band name. And if you're applying as an individual artist, enter NA. Of course, you don't have a tax ID number. We don't need to collect a social security number or anything like that here, so don't worry about that. For year of incorporation, if you're an individual artist, enter 4 zeros. And then include everything that's required has an asterisk, and everything that's not necessarily required does not. We're collecting social media pages, which is really helpful for helping to represent you later. Make sure you're tagged in those social media posts. And we collect your county as in addition to your address, because like I said, we serve 5 counties and we want to make sure that we're helping to support art in all 5 counties. After you fill that area out, there's an almost identical area called user information, which I know is a little annoying, but that's where it's like me. I am part of my organization of me. And then there's a little bit more that you don't have to worry about authorizing official. That's more applicable to organizations that apply with us, the nonprofit organizations like Interurban Art House and Kansas City Artists Coalition. And then you just need to set up a password. Once you've done all that, you'll be in the online grant system, and there's an apply button, and that's where you can find this opportunity and start your application. The evaluation process, like I said, includes that volunteer committee. Again, under application and evaluation process, there's a preview of the evaluation form. I'll take you through that really, really quickly. We include this again for the sake of transparency, that I think that people really deserve to understand how something will work and what will be considered and what tools will be used. And that's part of why we include all of this here. Some of this text is the same as what you saw in the application. Some of it's a little bit different to those evaluators. They'll consider the artistic achievement and quality that they see in your application, and there's some questions there for them to consider in responding to that. And then they choose a score. Career and community impact, again, like I said, those things are considered together. So your impact on the greater community, on other artists involved, and also on yourself, those are all considered together. You're scoring for that. Feasibility and budget. The budget, we're looking for it to be balanced. And you see this phrase a couple places, business as usual. This refers to something that you do regularly versus something that is really a big step forward for you, that is a bit more appropriate for an inspiration grant. So say every year you make 50 ceramic pots and sell them, and you apply for a grant to make 50 ceramic pots and sell them. That probably wouldn't be a very persuasive inspiration grant and may be kind of deemed business as usual. Meanwhile, if your plan is to make 50 ceramic pots that are as tall as you are, and you've never made them at that scale, then you've started to get somewhere where you're talking about something you haven't done before, perhaps. And perhaps the committee will be persuaded that that is really ambitious for you and something that the community needs, and that is really, really beneficial. Feasibility is a little bit more subjective, but it's ultimately, do we believe that they can pull this off with the plan that they outlined? Because that's what your project application is, it's a plan. The final two sections, the committee members might write some comments in that don't fit into the other sections. And then sort of gut feeling, yes, no, or maybe a funding recommendation of their overall idea of the project. But these two are not officially scored, they're just kept in mind as we review all the applications. Any questions about our evaluation form or process?
Yeah, would this be something we would ever see after the committee member uses it, just as like a type of feedback, or is it just internal?
That's a good question. This is kept internal.
Okay.
I look at all of these and I find what is most constructive and what I believe will be most useful to hear as an artist. And I'm willing to pass it on to you in a feedback meeting. You have to set up a feedback meeting with me.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And
cool. Sounds good.
I'll give you a link to my calendar in my communications with you about the outcome of your grant application. And then you can set it up easily. I can meet virtually or over the phone, not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And on that, I've got to say, reviewing over 100 grant applications a year for 5 or 6 years, most grant applications are pretty good. And I think that people should be proud of the work that they put into them. I think it's really, really hard when you're turned down for something that you put time into, and especially a lot of vulnerability in telling somebody about a plan you have that is otherwise private and secret and lives in your studio or lives amongst you and the artist collective that you work with, perhaps. So I believe that I and the committees that I work with really owe you a great deal of respect. And so I ask that all of our discussions and all these comments stay internal, because part of decision making gets a little judgmental, and I think that it's only useful for those getting to those decisions. But in terms of your life as an artist and your artistic practice, it's not so useful to hear all that. And that's part of why it's kept internal.
Heather,
Did you have
there's
another
a
question?
question on Facebook.
Yeah.
Elise Gagliardi asked, do artist collaborations still fall under the umbrella of individuals?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Therefore, these are for individual artists or small groups of artists. Something that Charlotte Street Foundation came up with in their Rocket grants in past times and probably in future times is the idea of lead artist. So if you're applying for a small group of artists, then the applicant is, or probably is, the lead artist. And so it's good to define what your role is within a group when you apply. So that might mean that you are the part of, say, a band that that tends to handle opportunities and management and scheduling and all of the business stuff. Or maybe you're the lead artist artistically. Maybe you're the one who drives the group forward with ideas and new works. It's up to you. We've seen a lot of different things over time. So when it comes to a project budget, we do not have a form for you to fill out to make your project budget, but I've seen a lot of different versions of project budgets. And one of the things that I want everybody to do is use a grid, use a table or graph paper or Excel or maybe a Google Sheet to make your budget and to line up the numbers and to show them out. So really quickly, I'll use Google Sheet to help you with this. Although you can use Excel, you could use a table in Word. If you needed to, you could write it out in graph paper or on a regular piece of paper with a ruler. it's really up to you. So just as an example, if any of you ever heard Julia Cole talk about making project budgets, the way that she described it was really, really good. And so I'm going to use her lead in my example here. Your project budget should have two main areas, and you can label them how you like, but the general concept is expenses and revenue. Everybody see this? Is large enough? Okay. So under expenses, this is where you list everything that will cost money for your project. My examples here are going to be incredibly vague, but I recommend that your budget be more specific. So if it's a flight to Japan, then I would write that. It's also really helpful if you've researched these at all. And that's part of where a project budget is a planning document. And so maybe you list these things out, and this is where you identify, oh, I still need to look up how much that costs. Take a couple minutes and Google a few things and look it up. And that'll really, really help. So say you find a flight that's $1,000. Say as part of your project, you're going to need supplies. Specifically because we're an arts funder, it's good to be a bit more detailed about that. With some other funders that are not specific to the arts, they might just accept like art materials without a Z in it. But maybe it'll be paint, maybe it'll be brushes and canvas, for example. If you're a performing artist, you may need recording studio time, or you may need stage time, or rent a venue. You get the idea. Use the border tool and make a grid, and then that keeps it all really nice and lined up. I'm just going to throw in a couple numbers here. And then you can pretty easily use a formula such as the sum formula, and you can Google those online if you don't already know them. Or you can type them out and double check it with a calculator, but I really prefer to use the math tools here. Something that's missing here is an artist fee. There's more than one way to determine how much that should be. Sometimes funders even dictate that you can set that as a percentage of the overall total expenses. And so for this example, we could say that it's 25%, in which case we'd multiply that total expenses by that 25, and it would work properly, unlike right now. Forgive me, I apologize. I've got my handy calculator right here. So at 25%, this would be $787. It would not be a percentage any longer. There we go. Just make sure that it's all included. Another thing to make sure to include is the other artists, and say they're getting the same amount that you are, and then you could total that up and put that in here, which would be, it increases it a lot. These really add up pretty fast. In terms of revenue, I know that that term is often used to refer to money you make from something, but in project budgets for grants, this is the money you will use for the project. It's even more confusing when people refer to this area as the income area. But if you do have income from the project, then you can put that in the third section. We can call that potential profit. So make sure to put in the grant that you're applying for. say you're applying for the maximum ArtsKC inspiration grant. And then say you're applying for another grant, maybe you're applying for a creative capital grant. I'm not quite sure how much they offer, but let's just guess that maybe it's $5,000. Go ahead and total those two up. And then you have more than enough money here. So what we're looking for in a project budget is for it to be balanced. And that should mean that the expenses and the revenue match. Right now, you have more than enough money to pull off this project. However, you haven't secured this inspiration grant yet. And whether or not you've secured another form of funding, make sure to put that. So let's just say that we did this time. Of course, there's other forms of revenue as well, such as past revenue, other funds that you raised as part of your art activity. So that could be, of course, products you sold or money you made from an unrelated job. It could be any number of different things. And you could also just call that personal funds. Make sure your formulas are still working properly.
Quick question in relation to the project budget. If you are essentially doing a second iteration of the project that you're applying for with you guys, should you provide a past Google Sheet of your revenue and expenses if you've done this similar thing already? Would that help you kind of see the effort put forth by an artist for a past iteration of the project?
You certainly could. You certainly could, especially if all those numbers make sense again with what you're doing. Sometimes we see multi-phase projects, and we welcome applications with things in all kinds of different stages of development. If you're in a three-phase project and you're in phase 2, for example, then you could make sure to label this budget as the phase 2 budget. For example, you could give us a little bit more information, like promise I'm not trying to make this too complicated. So if you included this, for example, it shows that phase 1 is, say, complete, and you used up all the money you had for it. Or maybe you have a little left over and that you're going to roll it into phase 2. But you could just keep that really, really abbreviated, and you don't have to include all of those details necessarily, especially if you gave us an idea of what those things, of what phase 1 entailed somewhere in the written application. I would say that if you're working in phases, the budget that we need to see is specific to the current activity that you're proposing. All right. Sometimes, especially in normal times, people will hold fundraising events. You might have a bake sale for your project. You might have a crowdfunding campaign. And definitely with crowdfunding, because there's so much competition for crowdfunding dollars, make sure to put in whether or not that is complete. If it's not, you could, of course, say it's underway and tell us how much you have secured so far. Depending on the platform you're using, you may be able to keep everything you've raised or not, so you could include those details. So my budget right now is not balanced. The expenses are far lower than what I requested, but there is enough money for me to pull off my project as long as I get some money from ArtsKC, right? So you could submit something like this. What you wouldn't want to submit is something that is out of balance in the wrong way, where you have far more expenses than revenue. That really points to poor feasibility, especially because ArtsKC is really, no funder is going to give you more funds than what you requested. So make sure your budget is balanced. It's most ideal when these numbers match.
Heather, I have a question. Does ArtsKC allow individuals or collaborators to have a revenue line item of in-kind expenses, meaning someone's going to donate their time?
Definitely. That's a good question. Can you give me an example of that for like an artist project?
Let's say that Luke is working with an artist who is going to do studio engineering work at no cost. So he could therefore balance out part of his budget by asking someone to donate their time that would have been an expense previously.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Definitely. So make sure that we understand that it's in kind. You can put a note in. You can put it in on the side. You can put it in parentheses over there in the line itself. However you want to do that is just fine. So what do we say the value of this studio engineering work if the person had to pay for it?
$1 million. No, I'm just kidding. Time is so expensive.
That's so generous. It's amazing. Okay, so so this is something that would have cost you money, right? So it belongs in the expenses area. Somebody's giving it to you for free, but it would have had a value of $1 million. Okay. This means that it also belongs in the revenue section. So just copy that exact line right there. This increases your overall expenses, but it also increases your overall revenue, and it effectively zeroes itself out. This is the way I was taught to account for in-kind expenses, and like you were saying, Angie, in-kind refers to something that's donated. So it might be someone else's professional time or use of their resource, like a recording studio, or it might be a stage, or kind of any other kind of resource, or their time, or maybe they donated hard goods to you. Maybe you're making a knitting project and they gave you 200 pounds of yarn. Well, that's a lot of yarn, and that would have cost you something if they hadn't given it to you. So although it can be difficult to determine the exact value of that in-kind asset, it's very valuable to account for it in your budget, to show that you've got it covered, and also that that your budget is balanced. So right now, this in-kind resource is balancing itself out. Another way that you can account for it is just to put it into a third section. This might be a little bit easier because these expenses are all cash. You have $6,300 in cash expenses. Of course, you have to pay for those with real money. And so having them balanced with cash revenue is very, very helpful. The $1 million in studio engineering value, we can understand as accounted for, and it's not necessarily part of the budget. So yes, you can absolutely leverage a project's feasibility by including an in-kind resource. The only limitation is that you can't use it as cash. Does that make sense?
Yes. I want to note to the folks who have just joined, I'm going to guess that you were under the impression that this session was still at 6 o'clock. We moved it to 5 o'clock to not conflict with Charlotte Street's 6:30 session, but this is being recorded. So if you want to go back and listen to it again, it's on our Facebook page and Kansas City Artists Coalition's page as well. Sorry.
Any further questions about how to create a project budget?
Yeah, I have a question. It might be irrelevant, but it would affect the budget. So in theory, I could get a lot of my like supplies through my employer and I would be getting it at a pretty discounted rate. Is that something I need to include? Because it would, yeah, I guess it just wouldn't be like the market rate for supplies. It would be a lot lower.
You certainly can.
Okay.
An employee discount is really valuable. And I think that when you're allowed to leverage that in order to get things done that you want to, I think that's a really positive thing. The discounted rate versus what like the sticker price would have been, you could try to use that to your advantage. We're not requiring matching funds any longer in inspiration grants we used to. And so it's a little bit less of a concern in terms of matching funds. Matching funds, sometimes that's like 1-to-1, like if you're applying for $2,500 and thus you need to have at least $2,500 in other budget, right? But we're not requiring it any longer. To some extent, we decided to let go of that because of the size of our grant. And also because we know it's very hard times for artists and we want to make sure that our grant dollars just go as far as possible. Okay. Having your employer allowing you to use a discount is really a good thing. To some extent, it could be kind of viewed as a slight form of community support.
Okay.
That's the other value of including in kind or discounted things. To some extent, it's sort of like your employer like supports your project by allowing you to have that discount. In kind, like having $1 million of studio engineering work donated, that may be a lot more persuasive though, in terms of community support, because that's a lot less common than an employee discount.
Okay.
And community support and community impact are still different. There's kind of money in, money out there, right? So yeah. But I love the inspiration grant proposals we see. That they're often so well thought out, lots of really, really good ideas. And I think that most people are working in community already a lot, and are surrounded by supportive people who want to help them express what they want to. And that's part of what we see in all of these. Back to our inspiration grant page. Again, this is where you find that information. Any other questions about how to apply or what to expect out of the process? Some questions in the chat. If you apply, or if you start to apply and have to stop writing, then you can save what you've got and come back to it later. Your application is saved in the online grant system with your login for a long time, really. It's all kept internal, and if say you start to apply and need to stop because something comes up, then you can come back to that content later and use it for a future application if you miss this opportunity. We intend to offer inspiration grants twice a year. Oh, and we have one more question about budgeting. If you're expecting to make some money off of your project, sometimes people will include expected revenue in the revenue area. However, that's further in the future than some other funds that you may have coming in for it. So the example that from our question in the chat is ticket sales. say you're hoping to make $10,000 in ticket sales, is a really successful event. Breaking that out a little bit can give it a little bit of weight. So maybe that's so maybe that's selling 1,000 tickets and $10 a piece. And that's how, part of how we can understand where you're getting that math, is if you break it out. This would be a pretty significant part of your budget, though, if this was your number. And if you've got that much in expenses, if your travel was thousands of dollars, for example, then you'd really, really need that earlier upfront and not at the end when you're selling tickets. That's part of why it's better to put potential sales in a separate section. And that way, it's not necessarily something that the project is quite as dependent on.
Heather, I know that the application deadline's 10 days away. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Which doesn't leave a whole lot of time, but I'm curious if you or someone else from ArtsKC is available for any individual questions between now and then, if there was something specific about a budget or something like that. Oops. Heather, can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. I think Heather's.
Oh, did Heather freeze up? Okay.
Connection. Can you hear me?
Oh, you there, Heather?
Yeah.
Well, whoops, I think we lost her. Oh, nope, there she is. You back, Heather? Okay. Oops, you're on mute. Maybe. I think you're still muted. Okay, everyone. Well, I think that we are probably going to wrap up from here. Okay. If you do have specific questions, feel free to reach out via email to Heather. I think that'd probably be the best way to answer any other questions that you might have. I hope this was beneficial to everyone. And be brave, apply. These are great opportunities, and we are so appreciative to ArtsKC for making them available to our amazing arts community. So thank you, Heather. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.